And we are, hold on, almost there.
There are two people still there with a video and...
Okay, we are live.
Good evening, bonsoir, and shalom to our guests this evening and to our viewers. Welcome to the Jewish Public Library's English programming events. My name is Trudis Goldsmith-Reber, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the EPC, assisting our Director of Programming, Roxana Browns, in making events like the one today happen. And we would not be able to get together, even if it's a little bit late today via Zoom, if it were not for our technical directors and moderator, for Eddie Stone and Maria Resina. Thank you, Eddie, and thank you, Maria, to get us all back in the right turn. Eddie will actually, after the conversation which will take place today, he will moderate the question and answers. We have about 15 minutes for that. And he will read out loud the questions posted on Facebook. Please post them. I just address our viewers to post the questions in Facebook, in the Facebook account, and Eddie Stone will read them out after the conversation. Now, today we have added to our open book series two very special guests. Today we shall be able to listen to Rabbi Reuben Poupko in conversation with Rabbi Yehuda Sarna on the topic, the New Jews of Arabia. Rabbi Reuben Poupko is well known in the Montreal community. He is the rabbi of Beth Israel, Beth Aaron congregation since 1986. He's the co-chair of CIJA Quebec. He's the former chair of March of the Living and the national chair of Canada-Israel Experience, and also the leading spokesman for the Jewish community on matters relating to the state of Israel and anti-Semitism. We are looking very much forward to a 30-minute conversation of the two rabbis, the National Chair of Canada-Israel Experience of Arabia. But before that will happen, however, I'm very privileged to introduce our guest from New York, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, who will explore in his lecture the recent history of the growth of the Jewish community in the United Arab Emirates. Rabbi Sarna was born in Montreal, and he now serves as the inaugural chief rabbi of the Jewish community of the Emirates. And he also serves as the university chaplain and executive director of the Bronfman Center for Jewish Student Life at New York University. Rabbi Sarna was one of the principal subjects of Chelsea Clinton's 2014 documentary, Of Many, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and aired nationally on ABC in 2017. The documentary is utilized as a teaching tool for universities and high schools around the country, seeking to establish norms of religious and spiritual diversity within their institution. The Of Many Institute designed an award-winning training model, Faith Zone, to train university students, staff, and administrators in religious literacy. Rabbi Sarna was appointed to the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, a project of the American Jewish Committee and the Islamic Society of North America, to lobby for legislation increasingly vigilant of hate crimes. In 2019, Rabbi Sarna was appointed chief rabbi of the United Arab Emirates. He has been recognized for his outward-looking and innovative approach. He was awarded the Richard M. Joel Exemplar of Excellence from Hillel International in 2008, and was the honoree at the Orthodox Union Jewish Learning Initiative on Campus Awards Dinner. In 2009, he was listed as one of the quote, 36 under 36 change makers, quote end, by the New York Jewish Week. And as we all know, at the side of such a prominent person, there is usually also a powerful and prominent partner. Rabbi Sarna is married to Michelle Waldman Sarna, a psychologist, and they have 6 children. And now I invite the 2 guests to start their conversation. Welcome to the Jewish Public Library.
Good evening. It's nice to be with everyone. The expression we use even for Zoom, to be with you. It's an honor to be part of a program of the Jewish Public Library, which does so much for our community. And it's an honor to engage with Rabbi Sarna, a wonderful son of our community and a wonderful son of a beautiful Jewish family in our community of Julian and Lazar Sarna. So Rabbi, it's a pleasure to see you and to be with you. And I guess we should just kick off with the question I think is on most people's minds. How do you end up being a rabbi in the United Arab Emirates? What was the genesis of this position? How did it come to be? Who was involved in it? And how did it happen?
Well, a lot of it actually has to do with growing up in Montreal. There are many rallies, protests, for example, that I remember attending as a high school student, Rabbi Poupko, that you led. I remember going to Ottawa with you and numerous occasions. And that really drew me into working for Hillel, wanting to be a Hillel rabbi and working on a college campus, diverse, very, very diverse student populations, and also many ways front lines. And I've been at New York University now for 18 years. But after a few years, of course, my main focus was working with Jewish students, and that was my passion. That continues to be my main passion. But what was unique about New York University is that they were building satellite campuses in cities across the world. And ultimately, they'd expanded it, a few in Europe, some in South America, Australia. And besides for Antarctica, they realized the only other place they did not have a campus was in the Arab Middle East. They were building a campus in Tel Aviv. That campus is functioning, but they did not have one in the Arab world. And they were looking at different potential countries, sites, and they found the greatest meeting of the minds with the royal family of Abu Dhabi. And at the time, when this was in process, I didn't think that I would have anything to do with it. I mean, not many Jewish students there, I would imagine. But then the following thing occurred. There was an event on campus, a planned event, which most people, including most people around the university, considered Islamophobic. And rather than taking a backseat to that and just allowing the event to go on, I actually helped organize the response to it. And little did I know at the time that because this was a planned event, word about this event had spread. And this part of the story, I wouldn't have known just for myself, but the president of NYU, John Sexton, told me the story about 2 years later, that the negotiations with Abu Dhabi were ongoing. But then, because from their side also, they were considering several different universities. And then they became concerned when they heard about this event, and they said, is this really a university we could partner with? And it happened to be that a representative of the Crown Court was in New York around the time of this event and decided to attend the event just to see what was happening. And perhaps channeling my inner Poupko, I was one of the speakers at the teach-in. And when that representative, turned to his neighbor and said, "Who is that speaking?" He said, "That's the rabbi of the university." And at that point, these are the words of the president of NYU. They said they're ready to go forward. So from the very beginning, I think my first trip was planned in 2009. Even before the university there opened its doors, they invited me to come to help interview students. And I've been going back since then, year after year, to help interview incoming students to see, who was the right fit. And in the beginning, I was, really on a cultural island. I would come to the university, meet students, meet faculty. I'd organize a relatively small Shabbat dinner. First, there were 5, 7 people, but then they grew to 30, 40 people, some of whom had Jewish ancestry, some faculty members who were Jewish, some students who would themselves not have identified as Jewish, but say that they had a Jewish grandparent. But then around 2015, 2016, I learned that in Dubai, which is a neighboring emirate, it's in some ways, Dubai is more of the financial center, tourism center. There was a weekly minyan that was meeting, and I got in contact with a phone, email address, and I decided to go out. And since then, I've been advising them. In 2019, it felt like something in the country was changing. That although the community based in Dubai was living a very private existence, 2019 there was an announcement that this was going to be the year of tolerance, the year of religious tolerance. And what that meant is that the histories of all the local religious communities were going to be told publicly. And at that point, the community decided that the ad hoc nature would need to become more formal. And they thought that if they could find a rabbi who could, encompass the vision of the entire community, very diverse community, that could help set them up.
Who are the Jews there? Where do they come from? How do they end up there?
So I'll tell you this, there's something that really shook me to my core, because that was my question. What brings Jews to the United Arab Emirates? And one of the sharpest thing that someone said to me, someone who had, there were really actually 2 people, one person from Belgium, one person from France, said, "What do you mean, why are we here? We feel safer here. And when we come to shul, we don't have to show our passport. We don't have to walk past a gendarme with a machine gun. We don't have to call in advance. We just feel safer here." And that's the truth. It is a very safe country now, and it's safe for everybody. Now, that might sound very strange to Western ears, that Jewish people would feel safer in an Arab country than they would in a Western democratic country. But then you stop and you think about what has happened in Western countries over the past 5 and 10 years, and the ways in which the very rights that are guaranteed by democratic systems have been used in order to frustrate, disable, and attack those very systems, under the cover of freedom of speech, or under the cover of freedom of religion, or under the cover of freedom of assembly, of course, with variations in every different country. Some of the most radical groups have been able to not just exist, but prosper. And this provides a real challenge. Now, one of the subtle things, and this I'll kind of share within this group, of course, it's very nuanced, and you might miss it, but there is actually a bidding war going on between different factions of Islam, sometimes represented by different governments, but sometimes not, for the hearts and minds of the Muslims in European countries. Now, depending on which country within the EU, of course, Muslims they're diaspora from different countries, but nevertheless, there's a bidding war going on. I say bidding war, I don't mean financially, I mean in hearts and minds, ideologically. Who are they going to follow? And for the Jewish community, I've heard this from rabbis and Jewish leaders in Europe. They say, we hope to God that the moderate version of Islam which embraces balance, an Islam which embraces hospitality, an Islam which embraces openness, is the version that wins out. And we hope to God that it's not, one of the other versions, an ISIS version, a Hamas version, any of these other versions, an Iranian version. We hope those are not the versions. And that's why you will see, on occasion, announcements of programs to combat religious radicalism, whether it's happening. There's one that's jointly that's working with the UAE sponsorship, but working with the Council of European Rabbis and a group of priests and a group of imams. All these things are underway. But that's why it's not what many people would think, but there is a real meeting of the minds between the kind of the path forward, not just for Jews who are coming through, but even for European Jewry, an investment in what's happening in the UAE.
Fascinating. So do you have any exposure at all to Muslim religious figures in the Emirates? Do you engage with them there, or is the interfaith dialogue mostly back in New York?
No, I mean, that's been one of the most enlightening things. So the Jews in the UAE are coming not just from Europe, they're coming from all over. There are from the US, from Canada, from South Africa, from Damascus. I mean, they're really coming from all over. And it's very uncommon to be in a room, in a moment, in shul with Jews from really all over the world. But I have to say that the kinds of rooms that I thought I would never be in my life would be rooms where are composed of religious leaders from around the Middle East, not Israel. So I've had the opportunity to develop friendships, not just with religious leaders in the UAE, but because the efforts of the UAE to kind of reclaim Islam, they are convening religious leaders from Iraq, from Syria, from Egypt, from Lebanon, and being able to be at the table with these people and to understand through their eyes the dangers of radicalization and how in many of these countries, the established religious groups are struggling to contain the radicalizations that's happening at the fringe of society. That's on the one hand. I had a conversation with a Coptic priest, and I said, how many people do you have in your congregation? He said, about 100. And he said, how many do you have in your congregation? I said, about 100 also. He says, really, 100,000 people? I said, we're talking about a different scale. We're talking about a very different scale, but to be able, and this is, I see this as a really unique privilege, to be able to take our seat alongside others within the religious diversity of the region. One of the things that the UAE leadership has very smartly realized is that diversity is its strength. There's one great thinker there. I mean, it's a leader, current leader, advisor to the Crown Prince, whose name is Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi. When he was in Washington, he gave a speech, a brilliant speech. He said, let me say it to you really simply. For us, religious pluralism is in our DNA. But it's not just that. It's not just that as Bedouin culture, we've always believed in welcoming a stranger. But beyond that, for us, religious pluralism is a matter of national security. We know that the best way to reduce radicalization, to buffer against radicalization, to prevent radicalization, is to have our young people meet young people from different backgrounds. That's the strongest buffer. So when you're there, you feel that. You don't necessarily feel the national security concerns, but you don't feel this. You do feel a very genuine embrace of difference, which, as Westerners, our construction of Arab culture is anything but that. But what I've been exposed to there is actually the opposite. That it's endemic. It's genetic to this kind of Arab culture in the Gulf. So
you draw a direct connection, it seems, and which is logical, but not necessarily obvious, between a moderate version of Islam, which is obviously of great comfort to anyone, to not only how they see themselves internally, but to how they engage with other religions as well. That means the moderation that the UAE and others are now supporting in the Middle East and in the Gulf, it seems that it goes hand in hand almost automatically with an understanding that there's a need for outreach.
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. Okay, this was my introduction. So I was the community asked me in February of 2019 to serve as chief rabbi. We didn't make any big announcements. We didn't make anything. It was very broad. I was just working with the community to help procure them the things that they needed. In April, I met Lana Nusseibeh, who is the ambassador to the United Nations for the UAE, the permanent representative. I meet her at a book talk. She says, anything you need, anything the Jewish community needs, let me know. I get a call from her office about a week later saying that the UAE is hosting an event at the UN. This is not a regular event. This is a special event. It's the 50th anniversary of the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. That is the second largest regional forum at the UN. We would know it from the other side. That's all of the Muslim majority countries together, a band of about 55 states that usually very often will move together. The 50th anniversary, she says, we decided that we wanted the theme to be tolerance. Because it's the 50th anniversary, we've invited Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, to speak, and the permanent representative from the Vatican to speak. Are you available to speak on that day? Can you come? So I was touched. She said, you have about 5 minutes alongside Guterres, and then they'll be back and forth. And I looked at my calendar, and just happened to be that day was Yom HaShoah. So I walked into the room, and I said, again, channeling my inner Poupko, if I have this shot to speak to 50 ambassadors, because it was the 50th anniversary and because Guterres was there, they didn't send the B level or C level, they sent all the ambassadors showed up. I have 5 minutes to talk to 50 Muslim ambassadors. What's my message going to be? And dare I mention Yom HaShoah? Dare I not mention Yom HaShoah? I walked over to Guterres just before we started. I said, do you think it's okay if I talk about the Holocaust? And he said, not only is it okay, you have to. And so I told the story of my wife's family who was saved in Berlin by an Arab doctor, an Egyptian doctor, Muhammad Helmi. Now he was since recognized as righteous among the Gentiles, who he kind of fake converted someone in my wife's family, and then fake married her to his Egyptian cousin so that she could get a passport and escape. And she survived the war by living in one of his residences, wearing a hijab. Okay, that's how she survived. It's an amazing story. There have been films, books about Muhammad Ali, and I told his story. And the conversation that was engendered, I wanted to choose that story because it showed that it doesn't have to be the Jews and Arabs. It doesn't have to be all recrimination. It can be also shared vision. But the boldness that Lana had, Ambassador Nusseibeh had, met me once. Say, can you come to the room and talk to these people under her patronage? Couldn't believe it.
When we talk about these trends, which are of semi-recent vintage, the move to moderation and the very significant support for moderation on the part of some of the Gulf countries. And again, every decision is complicated, a mixture of self-interest and altruism. But what events do you think triggered this greater investment in moderation? Was it the threat to their own regimes from the extremists? Was it the general decline of their own societies and the culture? What do you think were the main triggers leading to this newly emboldened moderate stance?
It's a very, very good question, and I think we'll need some scholars to come in at some point and study it. I'll give you my kind of front row seat impression. There is a long process, and then there are also specific events. The long process is that if you go back to when the Saudi peace plan was released, we're talking about 2000 and even if you look at some of the Gulf states, even in the 90s, many of them were ready to move on. And of course, there had been voices within each of those governments, which were voices of violent anti-Semitism. But then what happened is it was a slow process. Those people got pushed out. Some more dramatically and some more quietly. But if you talk to people in the Emirates, they'll say we sent those people back to where they came from. So, and there's been there was something about that kind of hatred of Jews in particular, which felt like it didn't sit with the rest of Emirati culture. It didn't sit with stories in the Quran about real trust between Jews and Muslims. Of course, there are other texts also, but within those, it didn't sit with that, and also it didn't sit with the experience that many, as the Emirates became increasingly a global society, and it didn't match with their experience of meeting Jews around the world. So that was, I would say, a slow process. 9/11 played a major role. When I met His Highness, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, we had spent about a half an hour together in the presidential palace. And he told me the following story, which has since been published, but it's a story that he's retold many times. But I'll share it with you because I think it really directly answers your question. He said that he was sitting with his father, who was the founder of the UAE, shortly after his father had decided to commit troops to the American-led coalition in Afghanistan against the Taliban. And he said he asked his father, this is going to be Muslims fighting Muslims. So he said, come, Muhammad, let's sit down. And they sat down, father and son. And the father said, why do you think I'm doing this? And the son said, well, is it because you want to curry favor with the Americans? He said, maybe that's 5%. Is it because you want to, you're worried that those radicals are going to come here and threaten you? He said, maybe that's another 5%. He said, so what is it? He said, the real reason why we're doing this is because these people have taken Islam and they have completely corrupted it. These people are taking the laws of Islamic slaughter and applying them to other human beings. And we need to make sure that for our children, for our grandchildren, that's not the Islam that they know. And I got to tell you, he was looking at me, eyeball to eyeball. And he was speaking very, very softly. The bet that they've made is a product not just of looking to the past. There's also a regional analysis which they've undertaken, which is that they've looked at countries which are strict theocracies and led by religious radicals, and they say that's not where we want to be. And then they look at other countries which were secular dictatorships, and they look at the way those economies and those cultures have not done well, and they say that's not who we want to be. And so they're actively engaged in a third path, creating an Arab nationalism, Arab pride, rooted not in religious radicalism, rooted not in a secular nationalism. It's rooted in the Arab principle of hospitality and tolerance, openness, open tent. Everything you go to in all the national monuments, you'll see the Louvre, everything you'll see is all about crossroads. It's all about meeting points. That's the part of their history they're bringing up, and that's the course that they've charted.
I know it's not analogous, but just to use it as a model, in Iran, you often read about, which is not an Arab country, obviously, but not a distant neighbor of the Emirates either, of a generational disconnect. In other words, the older generation tries to propagate this extreme version of Islam, but behind closed doors, the young generation is very secular in Iran. What's your sense of the younger generation in the Emirates?
So speaking to local religious leaders, you know, the way that they, and I'm talking about people who work with, you know, the everyday people, what they would describe is, I mean, they have a very, very sophisticated understanding of religion in global cities, which is what Abu Dhabi and Dubai are. They are places that people are coming in very quickly from all over the world. And so they very much recognize the challenge of maintaining one's own culture and identity while people are coming in from all over. And one of the things that they've described, which has particular interest to me, was they described the concern about the rupture that wealth has caused. The dramatic accrual of wealth, as you know, going from the parents or grandparents' generation were raised without running water, to what the children and grandchildren have. You know, it's like you can't even imagine the change. And so you don't usually think as wealth as you think as wealth as something that's easily transferred, but they said that the fact that the younger generation or generations are growing up in a completely different world has actually created a bit of a rupture. And sometimes radicalization can result from that, because when you feel disconnected from your past, when you feel disconnected from the roots, you start looking for something that's authentic. And so for many religious leaders, what they're actually trying to do is to draw that bridge, is to somehow kind of train the older generation in language, in storytelling, to be able to share some of their history, where they've come from, with the next generation, and also to train the next generation to hear it. It's true. You probably have more, conservative attitudes among the older generation. That's certainly the case. Some of the most inspiring leaders in the world, on the world stage, in my opinion, are that generation of 30s, 40s coming out of the UAE. Lana Nusseibeh, Yusuf Otaiba is the ambassador to the United States. Some of these people in the diplomatic corps, the movers and shakers in the business world and in the cultural movers. I mean, some of these people are just incredible vision, incredible courage. Many of them have people in their family who have, some of them have members of their family who were killed. But the person who's in charge of building this multi-faith complex in Abu Dhabi, church, mosque, synagogue, think about that, on the Arabian Peninsula, church, mosque, synagogue, together, synagogue with the built to every specification, with the mikvah, Mahadrin coming in 2022. I mean, unbelievable. The person who's leading that charge, Muhammad al-Mubarak, his father was a diplomat who was killed by terrorists. So they know from experience, and they know where they want to go, but they have unbelievable vision.
The final question I'm going to ask you about is about Israel. What do you hear? Obviously, the opening to Judaism has been accompanied by an opening to the Jewish state, to the state of Israel. And hardly a month goes by without a report about contact and or developing relationships or positive statements and comments from leaders in the Emirates. And I was just wondering, first of all, do you see Israelis in where you are in Abu Dhabi? Do you see Israelis, and what do you hear being said of Israelis? What do you hear being said of the Palestinian cause?
So, it's amazing what makes it into the headlines and what doesn't. And like what I would think is really headline worthy, and other things that are just are get reported, even though the truth is their significance is very, very limited. The op-ed that Yusuf Otaiba wrote. Yusuf Otaiba is the ambassador to the United States. He wrote an op-ed in Yediot Ahronot and also recorded a video that Yediot released. That should be studied. I mean, forget the noise about this airline landing, that thing. That's nice, it makes you, you know, a kosher restaurant, and all that stuff is nice, but those are novelty items. Anybody, and look, my focus is not the political dimension, but you just got to study what Oteva wrote. Study what Oteva wrote, and that comes, and anybody who reads that and says, "Oh, where was that coming from?" They don't have the right. They're not connecting the dots. If you go back over the past 8 months, and you look at 2 tweets in particular by the foreign minister, His Highness Sheikh Abdullah. One of them is a link to an article in the Spectrum in the UK written by his fellow Ed Hussein. That should also be read. Those things, I think, capture best, what it is that's going on. Some of the other things, I'll give you an example of a miss. The thing that made headlines is that when it was announced that the World Expo 2020 was going to be in Dubai, said, "Oh, Israelis are going to be able to visit," and all these stories you do at this, that. The truth is that anytime you host a World Expo, one of the regulations of World Expo is that you have to let in people from that country to be able to put on the expo. So that made some headlines. That was not news. I mean, there was no change in the regulations. I think it's important just to read the things that that are coming ex cathedra. Those things are official policies. Oteva's op-ed, I think, was taken very, very seriously by the Israelis. It should be read very seriously by the Israelis. And there's nothing that he wrote that I didn't see, reflected in conversations with everyday people there.
Well said. It's not my job to thank you, but I just want to say one brief word before we hand it off to Eddie to handle the Q&A from the questions that were coming in on Facebook. Firstly, it's wonderful, Nachas, just to watch your accomplishments as Nachas, as Montrealers, and we take in you, Nachas, of course, for your wonderful and beloved parents, but really, you're a source of Kiddush Hashem, wherever you are in New York and in the Middle East. And really you do a great job, and we thank you. And my 2 daughters, who who are the harshest rabbinic critics anywhere, say nice things about you. So there you go. We'll hand it back to Eddie.
Okay. Let me see. Yes, sorry about that. Rabbi Poupko, Rabbi Sarna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. Video's not working here at the moment. I think, first of all, thank you. That's quite an amazing talk both of you gave. The moment we're just waiting for some comments for some people coming through on Facebook.
If I could, in the interim, if I could just say a few things.
Of course.
I just wanted to really thank the Jewish Public Library. I mean, so much of my childhood was spent, as my mother, my parents can tell you, was spent at the Jewish Public Library, pre-renovation, and just I feel extremely indebted to everything that the library represents. And New York doesn't have a Jewish Public Library, and it's very missed. It's very missed. So I just wanted to thank you for that and encourage bless you with continued success. The other thing I wanted to say is that there's some great Canadians who are part of the Jewish community there. Most notably, the Canadian ambassador to the UAE, Marcy Grossman, who believes she grew up in Montreal, but she's become a very, very good friend. There are about 40,000 Canadians who are living in the UAE, some of them Jewish, and Marcy has done a phenomenal job at cementing the relationship between Canada and the UAE. I thought that's what we were going to talk about, but the truth is that when in 2010, the first time I came to the UAE, I only had a Canadian passport. I had to get a special visa because the relationship between Canada and the UAE was on the rocks. Now not. I mean, in part because of Marcy, she's really developed the trade relationship and other, political relationships. Stephen Harper, when he visited after he was prime minister, when he visited Dubai, he actually came to the shul, and we have a picture of him in front of the Aron Kodesh. So many great Canadians have visited, and I hope more to come. My mother's visited, another great Canadian. Still waiting for my father to come and visit one of these days, maybe with a mission led by Rabbi Poupko. We'll see.
That's very kind remarks about the library and Canadians as well, Rabbi Sarna. Thank you. Just want to mention that if anybody wants to use the chat facility, we have some guests via Zoom. If they want to use the chat facility to ask questions of Rabbi Sarna and Rabbi Poupko via the chat facility at to be Eddie Stone at on Zoom, they can do so if they want to now. I have a question from Barbara Harris. She's asking, what is the Jewish population in the UAE? And that, I guess, how is it dispersed?
The best estimate is that there's about 1,000 Jews who live there between Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and some in Sharjah, which is another one of the 7 Emirates. Abu Dhabi, Dubai have the largest population of any of the Emirates. There probably is, the perception of Dubai specifically is that it's oil rich, everybody there is rich. It's not true. I mean, people there, some of them are business people, but it's teachers, some doctors, some lawyers, some entrepreneurs, but really awesome physical therapists, psychologists, really every kind of type. And there is, it's not going to surprise anybody, they say 2 Jews, 3 opinions, but what about 2 Jews, how many shuls, so of course there's, this one, that one, and doesn't like it, temporary, he goes, comes back. So, there's, that you've arrived when you have a certain amount of, internal Jewish communal politics. But the interesting thing is that people are staying. So it's not a revolving door anymore. It's not just, okay, come 2-3 years and go home. It's people are coming, they're getting married and meeting Jewish partners. They're having babies, we're doing brisses, bar mitzvahs, weddings, and people are sticking around. So that I would say is the change. Very good quality, very high quality of life. They handled, COVID, for example, very well. They and the economy is strong. So people feel like it's a pretty decent place to set up shop. That I would say is a key difference, that people are deciding to stay. One of the interesting archaeological finds was a Jewish tombstone from the 16th century, probably from an outpost from the Jewish community on Hormuz, which was at that time was an island. Now it's Iranian, but at that time it was controlled by the Portuguese. And there were Jews who were living on that island, and some of them made it to Ras Al Khaimah, which is another one of the Emirates. And you have a tombstone which is chiseled in Hebrew, and it probably was not the only one, but the fact that the children, presumably it was the children who set up the tombstone, that they cared enough to bury their father there, meant that they did not anticipate leaving, very likely.
I have another question, Rabbi Sarna. Rosie Simon Schwartz is asking a question near and dear to most people's hearts, or especially Jews. How easy is it difficult is it to get kosher food there?
So there is now so for the past 8 months, 10 months, I've been giving a hashgacha on Ellie's Kosher Kitchen, which is prepared in one of the Shomer Shabbos homes there. So I can be mashgiach in absentia, and so at conferences or smachot, Ellie's been able to cater, meat or dairy, and there's a Chabad rabbi there who brings in his brother-in-law to do a chicken run at one of the local places, and it's not quite, you can't just walk into a supermarket and get Empire chicken, but they are starting to import actually kosher wine from South Africa. And there's many international supermarkets that carry many of the products that you're familiar with. and the increasingly the Star K, the OU, etc. Others are they're recognizing, because the UAE is an international hub. The airports there service everywhere, almost everywhere. You know, there are some other major food production plants, including a baklava company, because it has an international scope. There's a baklava company that has a Star K. So go figure. Pretty good baklava.
I have another question from Barry Scarf, which is, what are the attitudes towards Saudi Arabia? And do you see some of the same changes there?
Yeah, Saudi, very, very interesting. Saudi Arabia, very interesting. So big difference between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I think, has about 25 million people. The UAE has about 1.5, 1.4, 1.5 Emiratis. And then the other 8.5 million people are people who are out there on work visas. So Saudi, because of the size of its population, in part because of Mecca, Medina, and for other reasons also, is moving much more slowly. I think, from what I hear, the current leadership of Saudi would like to move much faster, but it's complicated. But I think Saudi Arabia realizes that unless they, move quickly, they're going to sink. The one major change, again, everybody is attentive to Saudi Arabia's laws about women driving and movie theaters. But the one thing that many people missed is that Saudi Arabia now admits tourists. I mean, there's never such thing as a tourist visa. If you wanted to visit, you had to get a special visa. And now they've entered into tourism. Now, they've done that before they actually have the infrastructure, the hotels, restaurants. They don't have that infrastructure yet. They're building it, but they don't have it. Think about, what does it mean for a country to say, we are now open. We're open for business. You can't just go to live there. You can't just move around, but you can go as a tourist. Major change. And that comes with, forget about just the hotels and the restaurants, security. If you let in people from the UK, from Canada, you better make sure that those people are safe, So they are developing, their tourism infrastructure. But that is an extremely important signal, but also one that many people have missed. Speaking to the religious leaders there, I mean, I met the one of the undersecretaries of education. I met people working in nonprofits, working with education, and I met some YouTubers and bloggers. Oh my gosh! I mean, the amount of work that they see ahead of them is enormous. But I think that they're up for the task. I don't know. It's a lot. It's very problematic in Saudi Arabia. I've met a good number of people who work in Saudi Arabia, Westerners work in Saudi Arabia, but live in the UAE because they're much more comfortable in the UAE, and they commute. They commute for 3 or 4 days a week. But they've got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of people who are not going to like that change. But let's see. I don't know. A lot that's problematic about Saudi Arabia, but let's see. Let's see.
I have another question, just briefly, from Dahlia. She's asking, would you ever move to the area?
It's a good question. I would certainly spend an extended amount of time there. My kids are currently in school, and as of now, there's no Jewish day school. There's a Talmud Torah, there's an afternoon school, but no Jewish day school. And that for me is an important thing. But I think that we're seeing a lot of changes. And look, it's the first new Jewish community established in the Arab world in centuries, right? The last one was, 150, 200 years ago in Bahrain for a group of Iraqi business people traveling. So this is the first new one. And that, I think, you asked about Saudi Arabia, I think that is the best litmus test. It's not one where you set up a test. It's the best litmus test. To Jewish people feel comfortable enough to go and establish their lives there. If they do, that's an indication that this is a hospitable culture.
We also have a question. Do we have time for a couple more questions? Because there are some people who are asking as well. I'll just mention from P. Blitzstein, just asked, have you visited Qatar? And can you say anything about the relationship with Dubai, intercultural or otherwise?
I have not visited Qatar. I actually would not visit Qatar. I can't speak to the safety or security, but and I'm sure, Qataris would have their talking point, would rebut anything that I would say. I don't feel comfortable with the kind of support they provide, the kind of support they have provided to Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood. I'm not comfortable with it. I understand that from a foreign policy perspective, there might be foreign policy gurus here who might say that I don't know what I'm talking about. That may be. I'm relating to my anecdotal experience. I understand that because Qatar is they're a very small population with a lot of wealth, that the foreign policy depends on essentially being the sponsors or patrons of many different sides, so that no matter who falls, they're okay. I get that. I get that they host a U.S. Air base, and they also support Muslim Brotherhood. I understand that. I get it. That they'll support organizations that are on the U.S. I understand that. As a Jew, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't support it, and I don't accept the Qatari leadership saying, "Oh yeah, when we host the Olympics, we're going to have kosher food," and somehow that's enough. I don't like the fact that they've flown over, prominent American Jewish, Canadian Jewish personalities who have a large platform, wine and dine them, send them back, and then they come back and they say, "Yeah, everything's great." I think those American Jewish leaders are making a mistake, because I think they're sacrificing a certain degree of integrity, and I don't like that strategy of the Qatari. I don't like it, but I hope maybe they'll chart a different course, and maybe I'll be open to a conversation later. As of now, I'm in particular when I had rockets falling when I was in Israel and during 2014, and the rockets coming over, and it was clear what role Qatar was playing, and I was so confused. I'm like, but don't they host an air base? And like when I see the rockets falling, and I know that Qatar played a role, it's very hard for me to go forward from there. Be open to it, but it has to be real change. It can't just be, okay, you have a kosher hot dog, kosher sushi. That doesn't work.
Of course. Keeping in mind with that question, just a quick thing. I was curious myself, in the UAE, how much resistance is there with this new Jewish community? I wasn't quite clear with that.
How much resistance? The community is a darling of the UAE. Some members in the community authored a prayer for the welfare of the state and its armed forces. The same way we were cited in Canada, we were cited in the United States. The community recites it there, and when Ambassador Oteva asked me to speak at the embassy in Washington at an interfaith iftar, about 200 people there, and also ambassadors from other countries and senior members of the administration. I really couldn't find the words, so really I just got up and I recited that prayer. I said, I don't remember the exact words, but God should bless the rulers of the United Arab Emirates and their armed forces. And I don't have any hesitation about reciting that prayer.
I believe that's it as far as the questions that we have now. Trudis, if I can hand it back to you, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, at the end of this fascinating hour and conversation, My thanks go out to the Jewish Public Library for having made the evening possible, to Roxana Browns, our Director of Programming, and she follows through what she plans, and she was able to get people together for this evening again. Very much different from what we normally do in our open book series. Thanks go out to Eddie and to Maria Resina, our technical directors. Eddie also as our moderator for the Q&A period. And of course, most of our thanks go out to our two prominent guests, to Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, to Rabbi Reuben Poupko, and to have joined us and enlightened our views about what is happening in the world. Thanks for coming, and I hope you will be coming again and report about more very positive developments. We are happy to have both of you here. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot and good luck for the future. Bye-bye.